This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
A couple of $100. It's a 2-bedroom apartment in Sydney, Michael. What could it cost? A couple $100?
I mean, it's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
New South Wales Housing Minister Rose Jackson underestimates Sydney rent prices. New South Wales Housing Minister Rose Jackson has suggested it is possible to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in Sydney for a couple of hundred bucks a week. During an interview on Tuesday morning about rental and housing affordability on ABC Radio Sydney, Ms. Jackson was put on the spot by a question about rent prices. Whoa. I'm the housing minister. I didn't think we'd be talking about rents here. Come on.
Well, okay. I mean, look, finish your, and then I'll ask a question. Finish your intro.
Presenter Hamish McDonald asked, what do you reckon is a reasonable price to pay in rent for a 2-bedroom flat in Sydney? Ms. Jackson said it depended on where in Sydney before appearing to guess the answer. Sydney's a big city, I mean, a couple of $100, right? Yeah. Couple $100. Asked where in Sydney it was possible to find a 2-bedroom property for that much, Miss Jackson said, there are places in Sydney you can. Not all flats are the same.
Share the tea, sis. Where are the bargain flats?
Well, have you got a hookup? Like, what's
secret.
the deal?
Yeah.
Do we know her landlord status? Are we across whether Rose Jackson is?
I actually don't. Is she a landlord? Don't know. I mean, look, is this I feel as though this is different to being put on the spot when we've spoken before when politicians get asked, what's the price of bread today?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like price of bread is, you couldn't get it this wrong. Like, I guess if you were like, how much could a loaf of bread cost? I don't know, 20 cents? Like, that's the equivalent of this.
Well, not all loaves are the same. You know, you got your whole meal.
So true. Are you going for like
bread.
A sourdough, a seed sprouted? Yeah.
And milks. Don't get me started on milks. All the different milks you could have.
Don't get me started.
I mean, she was asked how much you think it should cost, okay, which I suppose is like, I guess a kind of philosophical question. But but then
she said there are places in Sydney you can find.
Right, get it for $200. She
like
apparently later in the interview, she said she did not mean $200, saying don't put words in my mouth.
Is this the thing where people don't use, when they say a couple, they don't mean a couple. A couple means two, babe. People do this. They're like, a couple of this. A couple is 2. A few is 3 to 4 in my mind. And then if you're going to go above that, then you use a different word.
She was later asked about the comment. She said she garbled. She said her response was based on her opinion of what was a reasonable rent, not what people were actually paying. In the course of an admittedly somewhat garbled answer, talking about different types of apartments and where they're located in Sydney and all that, I said a couple of $100 a week. I know that's not what people are actually paying in rent in Sydney, but that wasn't the question that was asked. So, okay, I guess... Mm-hmm. Yes, she was asked how much people should be paying. She said a couple of $100. Now, the median rent is $720 a week in Sydney. Yeah. So we're talking about a radical and drastic reduction in the rent that people are paying, which we fully support.
Absolutely. She thinks that rents, so you're telling me, Rose Jackson, the rents should fall to an average of $200 or less for a 2-bedroom apartment in Sydney. That is a really radical proposal from the Australian Labor Party. And I actually think this is a huge Greens win, that the Greens have been able to push Labor to the left this significantly. They really are scared, folks.
We should drive rents down to $200 a week, but we should definitely not cap rents or impose any kind of rent regulation. That's insane and madness. But what we do want to get is rent from $720 a week down to $200. So with no resistance,
they were just waiting to reveal this as their policy piece for renters. And thank God we waited and we were pleasantly surprised.
Vote the Greens out. They're a poison in our political system. They're not about cuddling koalas anymore. They're about destroying large parts of our natural landscape for their mates in the renewable energy industry.
We're stuck with the hosts of Chapo Shithouse podcast.
Serious danger to Australia.
Oh, God, I love podcasting.
Look, more pleasant surprises coming your way because this is, of course, Serious Danger, a podcast about green politics in Australia. It is not an official Greens Party podcast. I'm Emerald Moon. I'm in Manjin on Yugara and Turrbal country. That's Tom Ballard.
Hello, coming to you from Goodnich Mara country and my parents' house. They're away. I've been in this house by myself for about 4 days now, and I'm losing my mind.
Ooh, parents aren't home. Holding lots of parties.
Yes, I should have had cool parties, but I
etc.
didn't.
Hilarious coming of age weekend where everything goes wrong, but at the end you get your one true love. They give you a kiss.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say that this podcast is produced by Michael the Griffin? I don't know if I did already, but if I didn't, it is. It's true.
Sure, that'll work.
We have some new patrons to thank, people who have signed up on our Patreon. We have a Patreon that allows you to chip in $3 or more a month, and it pays Mike's wages, basically, helps us to keep the show going. Tom and I don't take any money from the show, but that makes it sustainable. And when you sign up to the Patreon, you get access to an extra bonus episode every couple of weeks. So thank you to Tom, Andrew, Taylor, and Jake who have done that. Very much appreciate it. We just released a Patreon episode this week that is a little review of How to Blow Up an Oil Pipeline or How to Blow Up a Pipeline, the film, the narrative, the journey, the epic. We discuss the film and read some funny reviews and talk direct action discourse.
Sabotage, the ethics of sabotage. It's available. That movie is available on Stan if people don't know. So it is a movie that you could watch if you have Stan.
You could watch
and then
it.
You could listen to the episode and you could join.
You could do that. Also, quick last call. This episode will be coming out 1 week before our show in Sydney. We have the show in Newcastle alongside the Rising Tide Blockade. That's on Saturday, the 23rd. And we're happy to announce, quick drum roll announcement of our special guest who will be joining us at that show is Sue Higginson, the New South Wales Greens spokesperson for Justice, Environment and Climate. Also someone who's been supporting Rising Tide in their organising efforts for the People's Blockade. She'll be joining us for a little bit on stage at that show. So for everyone who's got tickets to that, well done. That show is sold out. We're very much looking forward to it. But there are tickets at the time of recording still available for the Sunday show, which is in Sydney. That is at 1:30 p.m. Sunday, the 24th of November at the Vanguard in Newtown with a very special guest, Mark Humphreys. Also, we will have special exclusive cool merch there. We've got hats, bags, stickers. You can get tickets at seriousdangerpod.com. They, I think, for the Sydney show are $27 plus a little booking fee. And we would very much love to see you there.
Come along. This week on the show, we're going to be chatting about what Labor is doing to your internet, and we're going to be looking at some bad coverage for the Greens this week, though maybe it's not actually as bad as it really says, although some of it is actually bad. We'll get to it in a moment. But for the last time, a check-in on Victorian local council elections. As you know, the results took weeks and weeks to get in here, to sort it out, thanks to the Victorian Electoral Commission, and it all being by postal vote. I can't even tell you why that was the system, but there you have it.
Weird.
You might remember last election, the Greens in Victoria had 36 councillors across the state. We ran 124 candidates this year. Now, thanks to patron Damien, who got in touch saying, I'm sure we'll cover it next week. Just a reminder that comparisons between how many seats the Vic Greens won at the last council elections versus this time are very difficult because Victoria has switched from a multi-member system to single-member wards.
Okay.
We could conceivably have many more people vote for us this time around and still lose seats under the new system.
This is what I think I was thinking of something. I don't know what I said last week, but I was like, wasn't there some sort of change to the wards or the system or something that makes this time around different? I knew there was something. That's quite a significant change. Like that's the system that we have in Brisbane City Council, and it's been incredibly difficult for us to pick up seats there because it's a totally different. It's basically Senate versus lower house. Much harder to do in single member wards. So that is very helpful. Thank you for pointing that out, Damien.
Thanks, Damien. And my understanding is that it seems based on these results that Labor's skullduggery in changing this system does not seem to have massively hurt the Greens. It may have very well undermined Victorian Socialists, for example, and their chance to get more seats. They have won some seats across the council.
Fairly well, though, right?
They did pretty well,
but
but maybe not as well as they were expecting because of this new system.
Mhm.
We've done okay. We've ended up with 28 councillors across the state. I believe that's all the results are in. That's the final total. Had 34 last time. We're down to 28. But again, with the new system, that might not be devastating. We definitely have lost some seats. Sophie Wade and Edward Crossland were returned on the Yarra Council. We were talking about that last week on preferences. Congratulations to those folks. Again, Yarra Council was the council where we had the first majority Greens government in the country. I'll hang on to that until the day I die, even though it didn't go too great eventually. But those guys are doing good work. So well done. In Burundara Council, a man named John Friend Perea got elected, which I just think is cute. The fact that someone's last name is Friend. I just like the idea of saying Mr. Friend. And I want to give a shout out to my local council in Maribyrnong. That's in Melbourne's western suburbs. We've now got 3 Green seats on Maribyrnong City Council. They are all awesome, community-minded women. Congratulations to Bernadette, Elena, and Samantha. I think you're great. And that bodes well for, the strategy for the party to grow our support in the western suburbs. Fraser, the seat I'm in, is a target seat in the next federal election. We almost won the seat of Footscray off the Labor Party at the last state election in Victoria. I just think that's good news for Greens out west, which is, yes, there's a bunch of gentrifying going on. There's a lot of young renters and stuff. But traditionally, these working class suburbs, these places where the Greens message can have cut through, I think that's kind of good news.
Cool stuff. Elections.
Leo Puglisi, the founder and chief anchor of 6 News, is with us. He's 16 years of age. I'm keen to get your overall thoughts on the social media ban for young people, Leo.
Yeah, look, I just don't think it'll work blatantly. I think it's really easy to bypass unless you're putting in a lot of significant ID for every Australian. Look, I don't think most people are going to put their passport or their Medicare or their driver's license onto a overseas social media site just to log in, right? The problem is, of course, we don't have a lot of this detailed yet. As you just played, we don't have 100% confirmation on the banned platforms. And so that's really unfortunate. And look, I think education's a lot more important. Look, when there's danger in the water, we don't teach kids to never go in the water. We teach them to swim. We teach them to swim between the flags. We're able to regulate these kind of things. And I don't see why we can't do that with social media instead of a blanket ban that could harm some of our most vulnerable.
All right, kids, let's talk social media. So the government, obviously, Albanese and Labor government federally is making a big kind of show around, quote unquote, cracking down on social media platforms like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, but particularly their impacts on young people and children. So wanted to run through 3 of, I guess, the three key elements of their proposed legislative response to do this, which is the age limits for social media or age minimums for social media. Maybe we should discuss age limits, but that's a funny joke. A duty of care.
Like people should be kicked off social media once they turn
when they're
like
at
60
a certain
or something.
Age, that's right. Yeah, that's the joke I was making. It was a funny little ageism joke. No, so discussing age minimums, a duty of care on digital platforms, and the Misinformation bill, relatedly, which is currently before the Senate. Social media age limits. We have discussed this a little bit previously on the show and their merits, but it's been kicking along in the news this week because late last week we finally got confirmation from Albanese government of the age that they were proposing. It was initially, people were saying it would be between 14 and 16-year-olds, that under that age would be banned from using social media platforms. Albanese confirmed it will be 16. They will introduce legislation before the end of the year banning children from under that age from using social media platforms, and the platforms would need to take, quote, reasonable steps to confirm the user's age. There are a couple, I think 2 sitting weeks left in the year, so they will need to introduce it then. And then once it passes, it will come into effect a year later. But there's a little bit of, consternation about how quickly it should be passed, given that we still don't know how the fuck it would work.
Yeah, God, they're really trying to cram it in. I mean, as we're recording this, I don't know if you've seen this the morning, they've just announced their new electoral donation legislation as well. They're going to try and get that through before the end of the year as well. You've got that. No time to wipe off student debt, of course, before the end of the year. We're simply too packed, and you have
can't
to
just
vote
rush
for
into
the
things, Tom.
You can't do that. But okay, they're going to try and get this done in the last 2 weeks of the sitting year. Very interesting.
Yes. But of course,
and also, sorry, another question going to this. Is YouTube counted as a social media site?
Well, Well, great question, Tom. Other people such as National Senator Matt Canavan also raising this issue. I didn't realise until looking into this a little bit more that there's a split in the position between, this is one where the Nationals and the Liberals are split, it seems.
Right.
So on the one hand, the Liberals are very much like, they're clearly seizing on this as a bit of a, hey, parents who are worried about, are you worried about your kids vaping? Are you worried about your kids doing drugs? You're probably also worried about them on social media. We just need to ban it for them. He has said the laws must be passed.
Are you worried about
by
your children
Christmas.
developing sympathy for the Palestinian cause?
Yeah, exactly.
Don't worry,
are your children posting watermelon emojis? Here's what it means for you and Australia's national security. No, so Dutton wants them passed ASAP before Christmas, whereas the Nationals are saying we need proper scrutiny of these. There should be an inquiry. They don't seem to be very supportive of them. And Matt Canavan has specifically said that YouTube should be excluded. He said, quote, banning YouTube would be the modern equivalent of banning children from libraries because there's a few books not suitable for children, pointing out that, yeah, YouTube is like used for a lot of educational reasons. There are a lot of educational videos on there. Arguably, though, it's true that like YouTube is one of the most fucked algorithmically, I would argue. You go on YouTube, and if you're not looking where you're going, you will stumble very quickly into like men's rights, far right. That's just where it funnels you directly. But there's also, talk Spanish with me, or here's how to do algebra.
Well, serious danger. Serious danger.
And
YouTube.
Serious danger.
Press that like button, fam. Give us a share.
That's right. But this is all in the details, that it's very unclear what those will be yet, particularly in terms of how the age would be verified. There are a bunch of options, and there is a trial that the government has said that the government said, well, the reason that we're saying there'll be a year from the bill passing until the laws come into effect, because that allows us time to run this trial and figure out the best ways to verify age. But the lessons from international examples of age limits on digital platforms is that it's very difficult to do effectively. I guess Albanese and Labor's response to that is, well, yes, like we're not saying that it's going to be a silver bullet and we're going to magically pass a law and no children will be able to use social media anymore, but it's about kind of setting parameters for our society that we would like to, in the same way that we say kids can't legally buy alcohol, but some kids are going to find a way around it.
But they can go to prison. They can
go to prison. That's right. As many people have pointed out, a child can be imprisoned at age 14, whereas under these laws, they would not be able to post on Instagram.
Good stuff.
Good stuff. Are you across kind of the options that will be considered for age verification on these platforms? And a lot of these are coming from, for example, examples overseas, like in the UK. They've kind of got a list of options that they've used.
No.
Well, the UK has a bunch of options that they use for their age limits, but I didn't realize, again, until looking at this, that that's for porn, like that's for adult sites. It's not for social media. I can't find an example of an international jurisdiction that, has successfully introduced age limits for social media. It's all about like adult content. So a lot of these lobbyists who are being like, oh, Australia is so far behind the rest of the world, that doesn't actually seem to be the case in this. But in terms of the options they use, the UK actually introduced these laws initially, or similar laws, in 2017, and then they repealed them in 2019 because they were like, these aren't working and we have major privacy concerns around the way that these platforms need to gather information in order to verify someone's age. But then in 2023, they introduced this kind of suite of online safety reforms that included a list of ways for platforms to verify someone is over 18 in order to access adult content. So that includes a bank can confirm your age, mobile providers can do it, they can do credit card checks because you need to be over 18 in the UK to have a credit card. They can ask users to upload a photo that's then matched with a photo ID, or they can use, this feels weird and scary to me, facial age estimation technology. So I guess you just,
Whoa.
I thought this was just a fun, thing you did on the internet to be like, your facial age is 43, much older or younger than you thought. Very good. You wore sunscreen. That seems
that's going to discriminate against baby faces like me. They're going to be like, you are 4 years old.
We could be banned from social media, Tom, based on just how fresh and young we look. We look about 15. The other thing that apparently Meta does is they, like on Facebook and Instagram, they have like behavioral assessment technology that kind of monitors the kind of accounts that users follow, the way that they interact, and even things that they will post on their birthday, like the kind of content that they're posting on their birthday, which all feels very weird and surveillance-y. And the other option, in this list is getting someone over 18 to vouch for you. So basically, like in theory, a parent going, yes, this person is 17, or anyway, someone saying yes, they can use this.
They're allowed.
But again, none of this has been implemented for social media. There's also these questions that remain unanswered around use of biometrics and facial scanning and implications of big tech companies having access to that data. And the communications minister so far, Michelle Rowland, has not ruled out social media users having their faces subject to biometric scanning so that they can be verified against a government database. So we don't know.
So there was supposed to be a trial, right? But we haven't even had the trial. The trial hasn't even happened.
Hasn't started.
And yet we're introducing a legislation that's supposed to be based on the results of the trial? Great.
Correct.
That seems
correct.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes lots of sense, hey? The Greens' position on this is effectively that they don't support it and are saying, well, this is clearly a kind of cynical political move that the government is trying to go, look at how big and tough we are, we're protecting your children, with legislation that lacks evidence, is kind of untested, and doesn't really get to the core of the problem, which is around how social media platforms target vulnerable people, including young people. And the solution that they're proposing is more around banning predatory algorithms, data harvesting, and advertising that's targeted towards young people. I think that's an interesting question, and we'll get into that because that's some of, spoiler alert, like that is, I guess, the duty of care element that the government is now saying they will introduce may cover some of that sort of thing. But the age limits in particular remind me of something like the vaping laws, where the Greens are looking for a nuanced response in accordance with the expert advice and evidence, but it is likely out of step with what a lot of mainstream Australia might be thinking. And I don't doubt that there are a whole lot of kind of middle class and just like parents across Australia who are like, yeah, I don't want the kids on social media. And like the teal types, like I'm pretty sure the teals like this. The Australian Primary Principals Association apparently is on board. I wonder if we risk putting people that might have traditionally, that could be part of the Greens' usual supporter base offside by not supporting this. What do you think?
Well, it's tricky, right? I mean, I think social media is toxic in a lot of different ways. And
yes.
I'm also generally sympathetic to the idea that young people, including myself, spend way too much time on our phones, and that these are like terrible things that have in many ways, brought a lot of good in a whole bunch of ways, and often there's a moral panic around their impacts. But I think like it's perfectly reasonable. It's not like an anti-leftist position to sort of say that in many ways social media and phone usage is cooking our brains and accelerating alienation and is often anti-solidaristic, right? And logging off and touching grass, these are good things that we should all try and do and encourage to be done.
Yes.
I just think it's just like a skepticism about whether this is going to work, and the sincerity in which a government is proposing this reform to send a political message as opposed to actually trying to address the problem, whether this is actually going to make things any better. And I'd also argue that the big problems with social media are true for everyone, regardless of their age, right?
Yeah.
The spreading of misinformation and the way that they affect our brain chemistry and discourse, and
absolutely.
And again, accelerated alienation. That's true of everyone who's on social media, I think.
I also, I think there's part of this is this thing of it's almost a little bit of denial probably from adults being like, social media is bad just for the kids who can't handle it. But me, my social media usage is perfectly healthy. I'm fine. I can manage myself on social media as I'm just gonna watch 4 more videos and then but I got an ad, so I'll watch 2 more after that. That's my personal favorite.
Did you have strong feelings about like the mobile phone ban in schools? I was kind of like, I'm not too fussed if schools try and restrict that. I mean, whenever you impose a ban like that, you waste a lot of time and effort just trying to enforce it, and like kids trying to get around it, yada yada yada. But as a general rule, trying to preserve the classroom as a place where kids don't have to worry about that kind of stuff, I think is probably pretty good.
Yeah, I think I just had like icky vibes from it. Like I just, on the face of it, didn't like the sound of it. But in practice, like, I mean, I know a lot of teachers support it. So I think I probably sit more on the maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe it's not detrimental, but is it really solving the problem? But I guess this is the other side of that is, Albanese says, yes, we banned phones in schools. That was great. But then kids still go home to the quote, social media cesspit. Those are the words that he used. So that's why they want to then ban it for under 16s. But the other thing that I think is interesting that I'm not sure if many people have clocked yet, and you were pointing this out, Tom, is what about when people realize that everyone is going to have to undergo age verification, not just children? And this is something that Green Senator David Shoebridge got confirmation of during a Senate's estimate hearing, that, it likely would be, it would be up to the platforms effectively, but that means, right, that it probably is going to end up, everyone is going to have to upload their face into the database to tell you how old you look or some shit.
God.
Yes.
Creepy.
Yeah. Similar to the Green, I guess the Greens' position, surprise, surprise, seems to be based on the views of experts like Dr. Alexia Maddox, cool name, lots of X's, who is the Director of Digital Education and Senior Lecturer in Pedagogy and Education Futures at La Trobe University. They were quoted as saying that the ban, I guess, not only, potentially wouldn't really work, but it also, there are risks that it has unintended consequences. It risks excluding young people from, support spaces that they might need, like, for example, young queer kids who are looking for a community to connect with. I guess maybe the Conservatives would be happy that young queer kids can't connect with their community, but who knows? But also, perhaps even more concerningly, I think, is the idea that you regulate these larger platforms and risk pushing kids onto less regulated and probably more dangerous platforms, because they're going to that's what people do. That's what teenagers do. They're going to look for somewhere to be. So those are the concerns that experts are raising. And again, they're pushing more towards something similar to the EU's Digital Services Act, which is a framework that's mandating age-appropriate design, clear terms of service, and no targeted advertising towards minors. So age-appropriate design, I assume, would, more be looking at that kind of how the algorithms are designed, you would hope. That's, I think, the direction that we need to be headed in. The government is now saying, okay, well, you want more systemic reform as well as banning under 16s. We are going to introduce a duty of care, a digital duty of care that will require social media companies to continually assess and then take these preventative steps to mitigate potential risks for, and as I understand it, for all people. This isn't just for young people. I guess there would be a requirement that maybe under this duty of care, they consider what are the potential impacts on young people, how do we deal with those, but on people more generally, for example, access to content that might encourage or promote eating disorders, that kind of thing. And the communications minister, so Michelle Rowland, announced this week. And the way that she put it is saying, quote, what's required is a shift away from reacting to harms by relying on content regulation alone and moving towards systems-based prevention, accompanied by a broadening of our perspective on what online harms are. She said, where platforms seriously and systemically breach their duty of care, we will ensure the regulator can draw on strong penalty arrangements. Greens have said this is a step in the right direction. What do you think?
Again, it's very hard to say without sort of clear details. About what you're talking about.
What does it mean?
I mean, to the point in which, a social media platform is a place where people upload their own content. The regulation of that content is responding to what people upload and sort of saying yes or no. Or the general principle of a lot of stuff is like upload goes through and then there's a content moderation process in which stuff is taken down that breaches those kind of content guidelines. So I don't know. Is it about a step before something gets posted, making sure that it's acceptable?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, to me, it keeps coming back to like an effective model, like an effective way of doing this would be about the algorithms and what appears at the top of your feed, and how that is directed towards particular groups of people and people who are engaging with particular types of content in particular ways. And that's what it is. It's like, because the way that social media works now, it's not the way that it used to. It's not, you know, I follow a set of people, they post things and they appear in my feed in order. God, I wish we could return to those days.
Yes,
no,
Jesus Christ.
It is now a carefully curated from, you know, millions, billions of pieces of content. Like there are these very opaque algorithms that like direct things in front of my eyes that are probably, you know, I think it's safe to say often designed in a similar way that pokies are designed, like poker machines are designed to stimulate parts of my brain in a way that is like addictive and damaging. Like I think that it is very fair to say that a lot of these algorithms are predatory, and this is the only effective thing to do would be to address that business model. And I think now that social media companies have realized how effective that model can be, it would be very difficult for governments to regulate against that. And the way that those algorithms work, that they're so opaque and complicated and probably changing so frequently, I would be very surprised if we successfully regulate that.
Sometimes it's opaque. Sometimes it's I go onto Twitter or X and every second tweet post is from fucking Elon Musk, for God's sakes.
I mean,
because I looked at like maybe two of them once. It's just every second post. I'm like, I don't care what this motherfucker says.
Yeah. I think things like TikTok's algorithm is a particularly interesting one. For anyone who uses TikTok, you're like, why did I end up on this side of TikTok? And there is a fucking reason, and I don't know what the reason is. I don't understand it, but I know it's unsettling. It's unsettling. Even the things like I've seen, for example, if I start watching cooking videos and then or I click on gym content and it so rapidly gets into restrictive eating, like body checking very thin women, like talking about how you need to be on a cardio machine for 40 minutes. And like it knows that I am a 29-year-old woman and unless I kind of studiously, which I do, be like, not interested, it will just feed me down like the eating disorder pipeline.
Right.
Yeah, very, very cooked. Okay, so the government says it's going to do this duty of care to address this, you know, maybe address this kind of thing. Who knows? Just to be good and do systemic change. And they're kind of pointing towards, we've got examples from the UK and the EU where there are existing duty of care laws. I looked at this a little bit. It seems as though, yes, so last year, the UK introduced this Online Safety Act, which included not only around age restrictions for adult content, but also a new duty of care for online platforms that requires them to take action against illegal or legal but harmful content from their users. If it's illegal, it has to get taken down. If it's legal but harmful, then users have to be able to filter it out. So that seems like a fairly narrow duty of care in my mind, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's the kind of thing that we end up with here. And there's fairly hefty fines if platforms fail in that duty, up to 10% of their annual turnover. It also gives their regulator, I guess maybe it would probably be the eSafety Commissioner in Australia, but gives them power to block access to particular websites that continually fall foul of regulations. But it includes exemptions or it says that large social media platforms cannot remove or prevent access to journalistic or, quote, democratically important content. So that includes content from news organizations or political parties and politicians, including any user comments under those posts, which I thought is very interesting. That's a pretty broad definition.
Oh, okay.
And this is where then we start getting into misinformation, disinformation areas.
Right.
Because alongside that duty of care in the UK bill was this new false communications offence, which I think seems to be a comparable intent to the government's misinformation bill that is currently before the Senate's passed the House. It's in front of the Senate. You said you've been seeing a little bit of reporting about this week, Tom.
Yes, it sounds like, I know that the conservative forces are marshalling against it very much. They think it's like the Ministry of Truth is going to be introduced by the Albanese government. They're worried, because that they said that the Voice campaign, the No campaign, was often accused of spreading misinformation, which it almost certainly was, and as well as the sort of unofficial far-right campaign during the No campaign was spreading stuff that was blatantly untrue, that they were saying this is the fucking Orwellian actions of a communist Labour Party trying to stifle your freedom of speech, and we cannot allow this to be passed.
Yeah, it did seem initially, yes. Like we spoke about it in episode 103, and at that point was sort of saying that there's been, this big fear campaign around it. It's actually much more limited than a lot of ironically, the kind of misinformation that's been spreading about the misinformation bill from, conspiracy theorists and kind of fringe far-right people. But it does appear that, I think there are legitimate concerns that are now being raised. And I think it's interesting that it was presented as something that, could deal with things like the No campaign, or maybe in a context of appetite for something that would deal with that. But now even people that you would expect to be very supportive of addressing that kind of issue, like David Pocock, are coming out and saying that they're going to vote against it. So David Pocock has said he'll vote against it. Tammy Terrell has said she'll vote against it, meaning that the path for it passing in the Senate is becoming narrower, and the Greens are still saying that they will consider the outcome of the Senate inquiry. So they haven't said how they'll vote on it yet. They've really only just said vague things like, oh, we'll look at it, and also there's often misinformation in mainstream media, so yes, we need to go after big tech giants, but we should also go after, Murdoch media as well.
So this is more than just truth in political advertising, is that right?
Yes, it's not. That's
something
right.
broader than that. Okay.
And this is an interesting point. So the misinformation bill, what does it do? It requires platforms to publish their policies, their risk assessments, that kind of thing for dealing with misinformation. Also requires them to develop and enter into industry codes that will be approved by ACMA about addressing the spread of misinformation and disinformation. ACMA, if they don't agree with the codes, can, I think, step in and say, actually, no, this is what it should be, but it's initially meant to be developed by the industry. It also then gives ACMA more powers through graduated steps to enforce these codes of conduct when dealing with that misleading or deceptive content. But the content, it's only when it's provably misleading or demonstrably misleading or deceptive, and where the provision of the content on that service is reasonably likely to cause or contribute to serious harm. Initially, the exemptions included government authorized content. And this is what we spoke about briefly when we spoke about it before. I think everyone was a bit like, well, that's convenient. That's a bit much for the government to be like, but no, when we do it, we'll be exempt. They've removed that. That was in a draft consultation bill. And so authorized electoral matter and government authorized content, political content, will no longer be exempt from the bill. But there are now some new exemptions, the exemptions have been broadened a bit to protect free speech. There are exemptions for professional news content, parody, satire, and the, quote, reasonable dissemination of content for any academic, artistic, scientific, or religious purpose. Pretty broad.
Yeah, God, demonstrably false. I mean, what is truth, Emerald Moon? What
is truth?
Right? Because
that's right.
I think it's perfectly reasonable to say we should have regulation in place. If there is a video going viral that is like a deep fake of a politician saying something that they did not say, and we know how good deep fakes are becoming, I think that the state and democracy has an investment in taking that information down and regulating it. The question as to how far you can stop that spread is kind of maybe a practical implementation question, but I think that's important. If crazy conspiracy theorists are out there, spreading stuff the Voice to Parliament is part of a UN plot to try and, as part of a land grab, that's going on viral on social media as it was during the referendum campaign. I don't know. Is the government trying to stop that going to end the spread of that conspiracy theory, or just reinforce the fact that they're speaking the truth and the big state and the one world order is trying to shut them down?
I mean, that's a good point. And that probably that is something that could likely fall under this kind of legislation. What's interesting, though, is so Anne Toomey, the constitutional lawyer, did a piece in The Conversation raising concerns about how the bill could impact free speech. And what she points to is around the definition of harm. So because it has to meet both that, it has to be verifiably false. That just means that you can get a fact checker to say, well, this is false. That relies on experts, and sometimes experts disagree. Like, that's what fact-checking services use. They go to experts. They might give different opinions. And then when it comes to harm, though, the definition of harm is very broad. So it can include, quote, harm to electoral and referendum processes, harm to public health, vilification of particular groups, and imminent harm to the economy or critical infrastructure. It covers opinions, claims, commentary, and invective. And what Anne Toomey has said in this article is that, quote, contestable claims about political policies could end up being classified as misinformation if fact-checked as false and if they were likely to influence voters. And so I think about things like, for example, I don't know, a claim around an economic policy like rent caps, where it's extremely contested. Some experts say they work, some experts say that they don't. Like, you could very easily get an expert to say to a fact-checking service that rent caps will help renters is a false claim. And and you could determine that would cause harm to the economy, and that's covered.
Yeah, and we've seen it. Well, you see it sort of with community notes on X, which, were celebrated for a while, and people using them to justify their ideological priors are saying, see, look at this community note, it's been corrected. But then on Israel-Gaza stuff, like, community notes will every now and again come in with some A-grade bullshit. And even, our most respected journalistic institutions like the New York Times have regularly fucked up when it came to weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and fucked up a whole bunch of times in relation to the conflict in Gaza too. So, who fact checks the fact checkers?
Who fact checks the fact checkers? Yeah, the Israel-Palestine example is definitely a pertinent one, and reminds us, just like the way that social media platforms have such influence on a geopolitical, like the way that a geopolitical issue like that is discussed and covered. And the definition of harm, how broad that is, makes a huge difference. And you could, most Zionists would say that, yes, if you say Israel is doing a genocide, you are causing harm to a group of people, like that you're being anti-Semitic effectively. What's interesting, I saw that the UK offence, their false communications offence that they introduced, includes sending a message, including on social media, that conveys information that's known to be false, and if there's intent. So I thought that, first of all, the fact that you have to prove there was intent to cause harm, and the harm has to be, quote, non-trivial psychological or physical harm to a likely audience. So that seems to be quite a bit narrower than the harm definition that's in the Australian bill. I thought that was interesting. There's also there's criticism of the UK bill in that it doesn't equip the government, or it doesn't, force social media companies to deal with information events, like where something is unfolding and information is spreading so rapidly, things are going viral that have a real impact on how that event is understood and then responded to. So the example in the UK, the most recent one, is the Southport murders, where there was that horrific attack on children. Children were murdered, and then rapidly disinformation starts spreading primarily on X, aka Twitter, that led to these horrific race riots, effectively. And I thought it was very interesting that actually, so the UK bill hasn't come into effect yet, but even under their existing laws, there have been some pretty harsh sentences for people in relation to those riots. There were around 30 arrests, apparently. Some people, so one person has got a jail sentence of 20 months for inciting racial hatred. Their post was absolutely fucked. They said, quote, every man and their dog should be smashing the fuck out of Britannia Hotel, which is where refugees and asylum seekers were living. There's this other person, Tyler Kay, who got 3 years and 2 months for posts that called for mass deportation and for people to set fire to hotels housing asylum seekers. I think it's interesting, first of all, to see those kind of harsh sentences, but also interesting that I would arguably the architects of this, like the people who made the post that were the catalyst of the misinformation spreading that really drove a lot of people getting whipped up into this frenzy, the charges were dropped against them. And I don't know if you did you cover the way, like, are you across the way that spread initially, Tom?
Yes, the initial bullshit that was being spread that this attack against these children was because of a migrant who'd come to the UK illegally when in fact he'd been born and raised in Wales, is my understanding.
Yeah. And the way that happened, it seems as though, there was this person with 50,000 followers, Bernadette Spofford, a 55-year-old, who shared these posts with a false name. And then it appears that one of those websites that just like scrapes a bunch of information from the internet, posts it as a media article. Potentially it's AI. I think they just like scrape things from socials and then churn it out, obviously without any, fact-checking processes. They're not a real news outlet, but they posted this false name of this 17-year-old, saying they were charged with the murders of the 3 girls, saying that they, yes, were an illegal immigrant. And then that spread rapidly. But neither the person who posted the name nor the pseudo news outlet end up being held legally responsible in any way for that. And I think it's a similar, like we've seen this. It's a very familiar story, even going like prior to social media. If you think about, for example, the Cronulla riots, that's, Alan Jones inciting that kind of racial hatred, the responsibility being on the media outlet there. But even more recently, like the Bondi stabbings and the Wakeley riots, and the way that misinformation spread so rapidly on social media in the wake of that there's no proposal on the table, as far as I'm aware, that would adequately deal with that kind of spread of misinformation and disinformation during an event like that can cause really significant harm.
So what's the future for this bill? It's losing support left, right and centre. Is Labor trying to get this misinformation thing through in these last 2 weeks as well?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they've said a timeline on it, but it will need to come back to the Senate. The Senate inquiry is ongoing, and then it'll come back. But the other complication is that Trump has said he's going to introduce legislation that would ban social media platforms from removing content unless it's illegal. So terrorism or child porn or whatever, but any other kind of content, they would be banned from taking it down. So that you would think, make it very difficult for those platforms to comply with a bill like the Australian one. So that really that complicates things.
He really has a tendency to do that, doesn't he?
Yeah. Whoops. We shall see.
From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Inside Politics. I'm Jacqueline Maley. As much as we can know anything these days, we can probably say that the next election is going to be very close. But what of the Greens, often called the third party of Australian politics? How are they faring with the Australian public? How well do voters know Greens leader Adam Band? And have the Greens successfully rebranded from being the party of the environment to being a broader-based movement? And are they unified as a team?
Well, speaking of misinformation, I've been reading 9 Fairfax. Verifiably, often wrong and bad. 2 big articles appeared this week, both of them courtesy of our friend James Massola. What should people know about James Massola?
James Massola. I get all of these journalists with terrible takes mixed up. I just know he's one of those. That's all I know.
He's the National Affairs Editor for 9 Fairfax, and I would say he's no friend of the Greens. Generally speaking, 9 Fairfax, you work with the media a bit. Do you ever get any sympathetic coverage out of these motherfuckers?
No, I think they're probably the worst.
They're the worst one. See, it's so crazy because growing up in Victoria on the left, The Age was always like the punchline as the bleeding heart lefty paper. And as I get older, I think both the paper has definitely changed, but also just looking back, actually it's like maybe, socially liberal, fiscally conservative kind of at its most left wing, always this kind of bleeding heart liberalism that is always has a reactive reflex to be like, sensible centrism and
Very
any radical
conservative,
politics is ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, these two articles, one of them, Green support a 9-month low, banned among least popular MPs, and hostile environment, the changing climate within the Australian Greens, which you have to respect.
Wow.
They've got two little puns in there about the environment.
That's pretty good. Pretty good.
We'll move through them pretty quickly. If you think we're going to get through these without a reference to the CPRS, you are fucking dead wrong, Emerald.
Oh.
Don't you worry about that. So the polling article, it is bad news for the Greens on the surface, but there are a few things here that make you go, hang on, what? Is this actually bad? And maybe this should all be taken with a grain of salt. Voters have turned away from the federal Greens, with support for the minor party falling to its lowest level since February, while party leader Adam Bandt has been rated the third most unlikable federal politician after Lydia Thorpe and Pauline Hanson. Voters surveyed last week by the Resolve Political Monitor for this masthead also marked down many of the crossbench party's signature policies, including ending negative gearing and capital gains tax, and recognising Palestine. The exclusive findings, no one else is touching these findings from our own polling that we commissioned, show the Greens' net likability rating has fallen to a low of minus 19 percentage points, down from minus 1 at the last federal election. Bandt's net likability has reached minus 15 percentage points, with only independent Senator Thorpe, minus 40 percentage points, and Hanson, minus 23 percentage points, more unlikable, while Maverick MP Bob Katter also recorded a likability rating of minus 15. So
Are you surprised by that? I was kind of surprised by that.
I thought people kind of like Bob Katter, kind of, don't they?
I was, yeah.
I also can't really, I assume that this poll is not just of people who read The Age or the Sydney Morning Herald. They're doing like proper polling. It's a sample size of about 1,400.
It's Resolve. Yeah.
Just 10% of voters had a positive view of Bandt, 26% were neutral, 26% had a negative view, and 38% were unfamiliar with him. Should we worry about a leader being likeable, Emerald? Does this concern you?
I don't quite understand. First of all, I just think it's so funny that in politics we have like these likability polls are very funny to me. Just the idea of, imagine, being a politician and your poll comes out and you're like, ooh, now I get to really find out. All of us wonder, are we likable? Well, don't worry. Now Adam knows he's not. And Adam, if you're listening, we like you. But I don't really know. I think there's some question about how reliable they are, and particularly apparently these are like very volatile month to month, these kinds of polls, and maybe that was in the article. The response from the Greens was like, these go up and down a lot. Is that right?
Yes. Well, as we'll find out, this same poll tracked a 1% percentage point dip in the Greens' primary vote since February. Okay, so down to 11%. Its lowest level since February. But the margin of error is 2.4%. So it could be nothing at all.
So it's within the margin. Okay.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting here, they have, the favorability of Greens as a brand, the whole party, okay? And that's a 24% positive view of the Greens, 44% negative, 29% neutral, and 3% unfamiliar with the Greens.
Yeah.
Now, I think if you're talking about all Australian voters, okay, our primary vote is sitting around, 11, 12, 13%. So there's twice as many people who have a positive view of us. I guess there's 20% of people who aren't voting for us. But that's actually pretty good for us. So,
and it's very telling, yes, when you actually look at the pie graph and you're like, oh, so 44% of people have a negative view of the Greens. It's actually only 26% have a negative view of Adam Bandt. The reason that his rating is so low is because 38% of people are unfamiliar. 38% of people don't know, which unsurprising. People don't know politicians.
Yes.
People don't know most premiers, let alone a minor party leader.
Right. And I got to say, if people are reading outlets like The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, of course, they're those people at least are not getting exactly. They're not reading a news outlet that's taking the Greens seriously, or is giving them anything like kind of proper positive coverage in any respect.
Right, like most outlets, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, most outlets indeed. The Greens and Bandt's likability ratings are the equal lowest figures the party and its leader ever recorded in a Resolve poll. They compare to a minus 4 percentage point likability rating to Labor and minus 10 for Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Peter Dutton's net likability was minus 1. The Liberal Party is plus 7 percentage points, while Greens housing spokesman Max Chandler-Mather had a likability rating of -3. So Max Chandler-Mather is more likable, according to this poll, than Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister.
Interesting. Preferred Prime Minister, almost, in a way.
So it's like, what are the lessons to learn here? We're being too radical, going too far?
Especially when, like, if you ask James Massola, if you ask the people who ran this poll what result they wanted, obviously they ran Max Chandler-Mather because they want to hear that he is the most unlikable person anyone has ever met.
Right.
Unfortunately, they didn't get that result, which is why that's hidden down in the text of the article rather than the headline.
Totally, yes. The whole thing is a big article, big case of headline tells you one thing, dig into it, and it's a very different story. And isn't Anand Bant the most, I mean, like, the dude's a lawyer. He wears glasses. He wears ties. He's clearly proven himself to be, beloved rather by his electorate, winning election after election, growing his majority in the seat of Melbourne. Like, he's the acceptable face or whatever. Like, he's a politician that I'm sure lots of people that read The Age and Sydney Morning Herald would be perfectly acceptable. It's like, that's a guy in politics.
But most people don't like politicians.
Certainly, yes.
I think that's We're not just talking about Fairfax readers here. We're talking about normal humans.
True.
In theory.
They also do polling on Greens policies. And apparently, again, reading the article, you would think that the Labor voters are abandoning Greens policies and they hate them. Then you look at these facts, it's like, this is doing totally fine, really.
There's so many of these, I'm like, look, polls, yes, it's important to look at them and think about them in some ways, but in other ways you're like, I don't know, especially in isolation, a poll like this. For example, the way that this question is phrased is very funny. I think that they've included in the wording around recognising Palestine as a nation state the removal of all Israeli settlers in Palestinian territories as they were in 1967. And I think removal of Israeli settlers is probably the most controversial aspect of this policy, right? And it's clearly a question drafted in such a way as to elicit a response of uncertainty and concern. And yet that, for some reason, has equal level of support to sanctioning all members of the Israeli cabinet. That makes me be like, what? Why is that the same level of support? You would think that people would be turned off by removing all Israeli settlers, but be like, oh, the government, we should sanction them. But also the fact that there's, 52% for a rent freeze?
Yes.
52% for freezing rents.
Yes.
That is insane. Sorry.
Yes. So I'm sorry. Well, I thought it was the worst policy in the world and the most radical and unrealistic, and any party that was proposing that are a bunch of fucking idiots who are completely out of touch with the Australian public. I mean, according to this poll, when it comes to Greens policies, the strongest level of opposition is opposition to the policy of banning all new coal and gas projects. Okay, that's at 36%. Which is
I thought we weren't environmentally radical enough anymore. I thought we need to get back to the environment because that's what people want to hear from us. That's really strange. That's so strange then that's our least popular policy.
Right. 30% support, 34% unsure. I would suggest that the phrase banning is part of that.
Yes.
Like, if you had said, do we need more coal and gas projects? I actually reckon the support for that would dip significantly. But yes, expanding Medicare to include GP, dentist, psychologist and nurse visits are free, 73%. A new 40% tax on big corporations making excessive profits, 55%.
Again, a 40% tax. That is such a radical economic policy. And 55% of Australians are like, yeah, go for it. 26% are like, I don't know, you put them together. Only it's like almost more than 80% of people are like, meh, sure.
Yeah, sure, why not? Just in case you needed any more evidence to maybe not take this seriously, I thought this was amazing. Resolve pollster Jim Reid said voters' perception of the Greens brand had become more negative since the 2022 federal election, which had led to seat losses in state polls. Voters expect the Greens to be an acceptable third choice, with a particular environment or progressive slant. But their recent forays into Gaza and union politics have confused people. There's nothing progressive or green about the CFMEU or Hamas. Go fuck yourself, buddy.
The pollster said, Jesus.
This completely neutral source. I mean, they're like Hamas, like that's it. It's like look at the policies that you polled, talking about recognising Palestine as a state, something that Australia just voted for at the UN, by the way. The removal of all Israeli settlers in Palestinian territories because they're there illegally. Again, that's UN policy. That's international law. Sanctioning all members of the Israeli cabinet, including PM Benjamin Netanyahu. Yeah, because they're doing war crimes and committing a genocide.
Yeah, so maybe just sanction them.
Maybe
It's
possibly
really
do
not
that.
crazy.
But to this pollster's mind, that's us supporting Hamas, I guess, you fucking moron.
Yeah.
And the CFMEU thing, again, I'm sure that James Massola subscribes to this opinion too. People seriously think CFMEU officials did bad thing, exposed in corruption by this masthead. Max Chandler Mesa speaks at a rally for rank and file CFMEU members defending union democracy. Therefore, Max thinks that everything that these officials are accused of is totally fine. Like that's the simplistic line that they will happily draw. And rather than interrogate that, they'll just repeat Labor's attacks on Max for attending that rally.
Well, no, I mean, and this is the thing that has really surprised me about the CFMEU, and I think surprised other people, is that there is, as a comrade put it to me recently, like, there is this layer of middle class people who consider themselves progressive, but they just have like icky feelings about the CFMEU. And I have no doubt it's classism. Like, it is because these are predominantly like young people who don't come from money, young men who look a bit dirty and who don't have a university degree, and they gather in numbers, and it's a bit scary. I don't like all the, the povo men together, these workers. Like, it is absolutely, they just have icky feelings. And so it's not about the actual realities or the details of what the Greens or Max Chandler Mather were doing in opposing the laws, cracking down on the CFMEU, or, undermining union democracy. It's just about vibes. It's just about the vibe of the CFMEU. And so I think that they are tapping into something right, because they and people like them feel icky about the CFMEU. And so they think if the Greens are anywhere near them, they're icky too. And it just makes them feel uncomfortable.
It's premature to say the Greens are past their peak, but if they want to grow again, they need to start acting more like a mainstream party. What?
Because people love the mainstream parties. Yeah, right. Okay.
They're doing great. Even though our radical, crazy housing spokesperson is apparently more likable than the Prime Minister of the country and the leader of the Labor Party.
Yeah, and all of these policies that we're proposing that none of you will touch are apparently incredibly popular. Okay.
Thanks for the advice, Jim Reid. Thanks, James. All right, then we get on to hostile environment, the changing climate within the Australian Greens. This is sort of a big, long read piece that funnily enough, links to the other article he wrote about the bad polling. It's a great little cycle they've got going on here. You get the polling, you get the bad polling about the Greens, and you get to write a long piece about the badness of the Greens, and then link through to the Greens.
You take home your lovely little check and you feel good.
The year 2024 wasn't supposed to be this way for the Greens. It was meant to be the year the party laid the groundwork for a successful 2025 election in which the party would claim seats including Wills and Cooper in Melbourne, Moreton in Brisbane, and Richmond on the New South Wales North Coast. Still going to happen. This year, the Greens have taken a hardline stance backing Palestinians in the war with Israel. Oh, heaven forbid that we back the people being murdered, tens of thousands and children as they live under illegal occupation. Yeah, pretty hard line. Backing Palestinians. Winning some new supporters but alienating others, while Labor accuses them of enabling, if not abetting, the repeated vandalism of government electorate offices by war activists.
War activists.
I don't know if that's like
funny.
A typo.
If only there was another term that could be used for someone who opposes war and is an opponent of peace and is an activist. I don't know. It's war related, so war activist works.
Really bizarre.
You are a war activist. Like, they're fucking war activists. Fuck off.
I mean, again, that's just a great example of a journalist just repeating what Labor is accusing of the Greens of doing, rather than clarifying as to whether that's actually true at all, whether there's any evidence at all of any Greens MP or Greens member facilitating, abetting, enabling, encouraging the vandalism of Labor's electorate offices and not reporting on their condemnation of that when it does actually happen. Just completely absent.
Yeah.
Chiefly, the party has been on its heels over the last month after this masthead revealed that WA Senator and First Nations spokeswoman Dorinda Cox had lost at least 20 staff from her office over about 3 years. 15 of those former staff have alleged bullying and bad behaviour by the senator, with complaints made to Ban's office and the Parliamentary Workplace Support Service. Cox has apologised for her conduct, but also said in a statement that month that there was disappointingly significant missing context in reporting about her office. For the record, the apologies sound a little bit like this. As the employer, I take responsibility for any shortcomings in what has occurred during this period, and I apologise for the distress this may have caused. She released a full statement discussing on this, which we might link in the show notes if people want to have a read. So James Massola sort of broke the story, and I think it's been fair to say has been doggedly pursuing it, has been writing lots and lots of articles about the way this case surrounding Dorinda Cox's workplace environment in her office has been playing out. We haven't talked about it on the show as yet. We sort of haven't got to it. I felt like, this article is a good chance to do so with all the caveats that, it's very complicated and messy, as we'll sort of lay out, I think. Have you been following it much? How do you feel about all this kind of Dorinda Cox story?
Honest answer is no, I haven't. And I feel as though maybe because it broke in the midst of the state election campaign as well, there were just other things happening in Queensland. And I remember actually after the election, I had a journalist message me, like off the record, and was like, do you think that the Dorinda Cox stuff had much of an impact on the Queensland Greens result not being as good as expected? And I was like, I thought that was such a bizarre thing to ask, because no, I don't think it had really any, we'd barely heard anything. There's not really been any reporting on it in Queensland. It's not something I heard anyone bring up. But now that I've looked into it, it seems pretty concerning. I don't know, but if you've turned over, 20 staff in however many years,
almost
something's
just
not right
3
with the
years.
culture of that office, right?
Yes, something's definitely going wrong. I think Dorinda Cox would acknowledge that based on the statements that she's saying, but there's clearly a lot of tension and turmoil within the WA Greens over this particular issue. But yes, I mean, our hesitation to talk about this stuff is it's very hard to figure out exactly what's going on. A lot of it is being dealt through the media reports with various sources. In my head, when I look at this stuff, is also the history of some of these other stories. I'm thinking particularly of the Alex Patel example years ago in the Victorian Greens, in which it seemed to me some spurious allegations of bullying were used to try and take down a progressive candidate, which ended up fucking the Greens' chances in Batman. I in no way am saying that to minimise the experience of people who are coming forward here, and I think these allegations are serious and should absolutely be investigated. But I guess that's just forms the messiness of the position.
Yes.
Adam's response to this stuff has been pretty consistently to say that everything should be dealt with through the Parliament's Independent Workplace Support Service, the PWSS. He says that's the appropriate body to deal with staff issues because it's immune from politics. That's the process that we have. In the coverage, Massola would say, well, that body can't actually discipline MPs. So he's certainly placing pressure on, and journalists have been asking Adam and other Greens MPs and senators in press conferences, what are you going to do about this? What's the position? Is anything going to happen to Dorinda Cox? Dorinda Cox is also saying, yes, everything should be dealt with through the PWSS. That's the appropriate way to deal with this stuff. And then also people coming forward with allegations who said, well, I did that. I tried to have something sorted out that way, and it didn't really happen. There was also, speaking of the Queensland election, this weird wrinkle, this particularly kind of, if true, quite disturbing story. Embattled, this is back in October, embattled Green Senator Dorinda Cox has threatened legal action against her own party, halting moves to start a formal censure motion over allegations that the MP bullied staff in her office. Cox's threat comes after her federal colleagues allegedly pressured the party's West Australian branch to drop an investigation into the allegations, while party officials warned starting a probe could cost the Greens votes at the Queensland election. Specifically, the article goes on to say that Nick McKim and Penny Allman-Payne were saying, let's not use the word investigation. It's legally risky and it could affect our chances in Queensland. You didn't hear anything about that?
Legally risky, like as in that it could constitute defamation or something?
Guess so, yeah.
No, yeah. I saw this reported as like a headline that, there was allegations that it had been blocked because it would cost the Queensland Greens votes. But I don't know is the answer what happened. But I feel as though an investigation itself, like conducting an independent investigation, is the least risky approach. Right?
Yes, that allows you to say we're doing something about this, I suppose. Yes.
Yeah.
And sorry, that sounds cynical. Both you get to actually do something about this to resolve it, and also you can say that this
logical
process is being dealt with. Yes. again, like affecting the Queen's election. People don't know who Adam Bandt is, for fuck's sake. Like, I don't think this is like cutting
That's
through
right.
in a massive
It's like
way.
not everyone is reading your masthead.
Eventually, the censure motion did happen. The WA Greens did censure Dorinda Cox. An investigation has been set up to look into the allegations, and it seems to me that WA Greens are taking it quite seriously. They're asking members to come forward. They do want to get to the bottom of this. There has been talk, at least backgrounding from anonymous sources in these articles, that people in WA Greens want to expel her from the party, or at least ensure that she doesn't seek re-selection in 2028. So there's all that, and we'll go into this. In this Changing Environment article, they talked about the national conference, which happened in Tasmania over the weekend. Members of the Black Greens stood up and said that, like, we've had enough. We want her portfolio stripping from her pending an inquiry while this investigation is happening. And they've also called on the Greens WA and the Federal Party Room to consider expelling Dorinda Cox for her alleged conduct.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened at Federal Conference. Again, there's no media at National Conference, so it's very hard to figure out exactly what is happening.
From quote-unquote sources who then... Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
The Bandt, according to the conference attendees in the room, was visibly annoyed at this comment from the Black Greens. Though the Greens leader declined to comment on the record for the story, his office disputed the claim that the party leader had been annoyed.
He's just got resting annoyed face.
Yes. Again, very hard to take how all this is seriously, how to take all this. I guess, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts as someone who deals with the media? Is there a better strategy to deal with all this? Is there any value in Adam or Dorinda sitting down with anybody and laying it all out there going through it? Or is that, no, that's not good.
I don't think so. I think while there's an investigation ongoing, I don't think so. Like, I guess if you knew it sounds to me that they don't really know everything that's happened, because there's there's 20 staff to deal with. Like, there's lots of different sides of the story to get. If they knew all of the details, then yeah, it probably would be better to get that all, deal with that all in one. But to go out and try to explain the story before you know all of the facts seems like a recipe for disaster to me.
It's crazy because normally in a story like this, you have some kind of detail of like things that were done to other people that is evidence of clear bullying. Again, I've read a bunch of articles about this, and kind of the harshest thing I heard was someone saying, I saw Dorinda do something, or she did things to me that some people have described as bullying. That's as kind of as concrete as it got. Again, I'm not saying that there's nothing to this or anything, or minimizing people's experience. Yeah, I'm just saying that as far as we know.
Yeah, like how do you form an opinion when you really just don't know? I mean, bullying is that's a very subjective concept, right? Like it's difficult to define.
The final hit of the article is this. It's long been accepted wisdom within the Greens party room that the party's best election is always the one after a Labor government is elected, as disappointed ALP supporters who think the government hasn't done enough on a particular issue shift to the Greens. Certainly, that's what happened at the 2010 election after the Greens joined with the coalition to block Kevin Rudd's carbon pollution reduction scheme.
Hey! Ring the bell, ring the bell.
But as the 2025 election approaches, the Greens face tough questions about how they've handled the Cox allegations.
From whom?
Several current and former... Yeah, from James Massola. Several current and former Green staffers who asked not to be named so they could speak freely said Bandt disliked confrontation and had largely deputised his Chief of Staff, Damien Lawson, and Deputy Chief of Staff, Jess McColl, to handle the allegations against Cox, though the leader's office disputed this claim. Adam doesn't like confrontation. He's so focused on the goal, which is climate and housing policy. Oh, heaven forbid. He doesn't want to get knocked off target. But this is a real problem for them, and they have to deal with it. Now, again, these allegations are serious. No one should be bullied at work. It's bad. An investigation should be sorted out, and we need to get to the bottom of this, and there should be fair processes within the party to address this. But yes, the thing I mainly take issue with is the suggestion that this is the big story, or this is a crisis within the Greens, this is the number one issue facing the Greens, and that this is seriously cutting through and a topic of conversation, and people across the country are weighing up this particular case when it comes to their views on the Greens policy or voting for the Greens. Is that fair to say?
It's just, if they say it enough, then it will be true. And it's in the same way that if they say enough that people are concerned about the Greens' support from the militant CFMEU union, or the Greens' support for Hamas and Hezbollah. Like, if they say it, or the Greens being blockers on housing bills, they just say these things enough because that is how they make them an issue. But I don't deny, like, I think looking at the Queensland state election, I don't deny that there are some people who didn't vote Greens because of those issues, but they were not the main issue. Like, altogether, I guess, the media thinks if we just throw enough things out there, then we can take little chunks off the Greens vote. But fundamentally, people vote for policies that they think will make a material difference in their lives, and they often vote out of fear, and that's how people voted in the state election in Queensland. And they voted to keep the LNP out because they thought they were conservative and bad, and they voted Labor because they were doing good things like 50-cent fares. Like, they didn't. It wasn't because, they were not voting based on this masthead's reporting, James Mazzola. I'm sorry.
About a WA Greens federal senator who, let's be real, Dorinda Cox does not have a massive public profile across the board, right? Even during the Voice referendum campaign, I don't think she was. One of the lowest of our federal MPs. Is it also true to say that on these particular stories about toxic culture, about bad workplace stuff, when they're focused on the Greens, and again, not denying the fact that terrible, dodgy, toxic stuff has happened within the Greens party, like that's just true.
Greens political
when
party.
the story is focused on the Greens, it becomes a lot more like existential, or it becomes so much more like,
it's no longer one bad apple. It's the Greens are rotten.
The Greens are rotten, and these people can't be trusted with power, and they're winning these seats, but really they're falling apart. When in fact, toxic bullying workplace allegations happen to all parties. I remember there was a big scandal about the chief of staff in Albanese's office, bullying allegations and people quitting and moving all over the place. And the story was reported on, but it's certainly not held up as like, should the Labor Party really exist or really be winning seats whatsoever? It
feels difficult to go down this road, right? Because it sounds like a little bit of whataboutism, or like we're justifying it because, well, the other parties do it too. And it's like, that doesn't justify it. But I see what you're saying, that the way that the media treats something like this is, oh, that's it. Because I think in their mind, yes, they still, like, they conceive of the Greens as this house of cards. It's not an established institution like the major parties that they support. And so at any point it can be knocked over, and anything that's going wrong is a sign that it's about to get knocked over because they've had their time, they had their little surge, they've passed their peak, and now they can go away and never become a significant force in politics, because that would mess up the whole status quo, and that would mess up, what we've got going on. So I think that it's just part of the way that they conceive of the Greens, right?
True. Well, yes, again, in no way want to minimize these stories, dismiss them. We hope that everything is investigated fully through a fair democratic process, and that the people who have been wronged, get their fair dues. And perhaps we'll get more details as the story develops. I feel like we finish every story with "we'll wait and see," but I don't know what else.
We shall see. I thought that when I said that at the end of the last section, I was like, I don't know if Mike one day gets bored and wants to cut up every time I say "we shall see," but that would probably be embarrassing for me. Anyway, we shall see. We shall see you at the Rising Tide Blockade this fucking coming weekend on Saturday, when we'll be there for the live show. But also, it's starting this week. There will be lots of activities around the blockade, the protestival. Also, you don't have to be there. You should go, but if you can't go, you can still support Rising Tide. Even if you're not in Newcastle, we'll put the link to their website in the show notes. But there's lots of ways that you can get involved and support what they're doing to take on fossil fuel giants and protect our climate. And of course, that's your call to action. Other call to action is please come to our Sydney show, because we want to see you there, Sydney friends. Tell your friends, bring your family. Maybe they'll get convinced. Maybe they'll vote Greens. Who knows? Who can say? We shall see. We shall see.
We should say, we always do stuff at live shows that doesn't necessarily get released, or will only get released on the Patreon feed. So it's definitely worth your while coming along. Mark Humphries is going to be a fantastic guest. We'd love to see you there next Sunday. Thanks for listening. Rate and review our show at Apple Podcasts. Give it a 5-star review. We'd love that. Follow us at Serious Danger AU on all those social media sites before it's fucking illegal. And email us anytime, hello@seriousdangerpod.com. We love you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Serious Danger Australia.